I won $85 million in the Powerball lottery, but I kept it a complete secret from my family. I decided to test them first, and only one person in my entire bloodline offered me a helping hand when I pretended to be at rock bottom. The rest of them chose to kick me while I was down. My name is Chloe. I am 35 years old, and what happened at our last Thanksgiving dinner changed the trajectory of my entire family forever. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to cut off toxic family members who completely underestimated your worth. The dining room of my mother Brenda's house was suffocatingly warm. It smelled of roasted turkey, expensive sage stuffing, and the overpowering Tom Ford cologne my brother-in-law Trent insisted on wearing in copious amounts. Trent is 40 years old, white, and perpetually acts like he is the only person in the room who understands how the global economy works. I was carrying the heavy crystal gravy boat to the table, making sure not to drip a single drop on my mother's immaculate white tablecloth. Trent was holding a glass of $500 Cabernet Sauvignon, gesturing wildly as he bragged to the room about his latest commercial real estate acquisition. As I walked past his chair, he did not just accidentally bump into me. He stopped. His conversation looked me dead in the eye, smirked, and deliberately tilted his wrist. The dark red liquid splashed directly onto my chest, soaking instantly into the pristine beige blouse I had saved up for 2 months to buy. I gasped as the cold liquid stained my skin and ruined my clothes. The entire dining table went dead silent. For a second, nobody moved. Then Trent chuckled. It was a low, arrogant sound that grated against my ears. He reached into the pocket of his tailored slacks, pulled out a crumpled $20 bill, and tossed it onto the floor right by my shoes. "Clean it up, Chloe," he said, taking another casual sip from his half-empty glass. "That 20 should cover half a day of you standing in a hot kitchen kneading dough, right?" I stood frozen, expecting anyone to defend me. I looked at my mother, hoping to see maternal outrage. Instead, a sharp, familiar laugh echoed from the head of the table. It was my mother, Brenda. "Oh, please, Chloe, stop looking so dramatic," she said, waving her hand dismissively at me. "Trent was just making a harmless joke. Go to the laundry room and soak that shirt before the wine drips and ruins my good dining chairs." My sister Vanessa, who is Trent's wife and the undisputed golden child of our family, leaned back in her chair and meticulously inspected her flawless acrylic nails. "You know, Mom," Vanessa drawled, her voice dripping with condescension. If Chloe had just finished her degree at Spelman College, instead of dropping out to cook macaroni and cheese for a living, she could afford to buy a new shirt without looking like she is about to cry over a piece of cheap fabric. "The catering business is cute, Chloe, but let us be real here. You are essentially just a glorified servant. It is no wonder Trent mistook you for the help." The humiliation burned much hotter than the wine soaking through my clothes. For 10 agonizing years, I had poured my blood, sweat, and tears into building my small catering company. I worked 14-hour shifts on my feet. I burned my hands on commercial ovens. I missed every single holiday and family gathering just to keep my small business afloat and pay my rent. I built something from nothing. Meanwhile, Vanessa had her entire college tuition paid in full by our mother. She had her lavish destination wedding fully funded, and she now lived in a massive mansion, funded by Trent's supposedly endless wealth. My mother nodded enthusiastically at Vanessa's cruel words, completely ignoring the fact that I was standing there dripping in red wine. "Your sister is absolutely right, Chloe," my mother chimed in. "I always told you that opening a food business was a fast track to nowhere. You threw away a perfectly good future to smell like fried onions and grease all day. Look at Trent and Vanessa. They understand true wealth. They understand status and networking. You just serve people food and clean up after them. You should be taking notes from Trent instead of standing there pouting." I stood there staring at the $20 bill resting on the expensive hardwood floor. My chest tightened painfully. The old me would have burst into tears right then and there. The old me would have frantically apologized for being in the way, bent down to pick up the money in shame, and ran to the kitchen to scrub the stain out while quietly sobbing. The old me would have desperately begged for their approval, hoping that maybe one day they would see my hard work, validate my struggles, and finally be proud of me. But the old me died the moment I checked my banking application 3 days ago and saw exactly $85,400,000 sitting quietly in my checking account. I did not cry. I did not yell. I did not throw the gravy boat at Trent's smug face, even though I really wanted to. I looked at Trent's arrogant smile, then at Vanessa's mocking grin, and finally at my mother's deeply disappointed glare. I took a deep, slow breath, letting the cold reality of their hatred wash over me completely. I realized in that exact second that they did not love me. They never did. They only tolerated my presence because having a struggling failure in the family made their fake perfection look that much better by comparison. I slowly bent down, picked up the crumpled $20 bill from the floor, and slipped it into my pocket. I looked back up at Trent and gave him a calm, deadpan smile that made his smug expression falter for just a fraction of a second. "You are right, Trent," I said softly, keeping my voice completely steady. "Money is incredibly hard to come by these days. I will make sure to put this to good use." I turned around and walked into the kitchen, gripping the gravy boat so hard my knuckles turned white. They thought they had just humiliated the family failure. They thought they had put the servant back in her place. They had absolutely no idea they had just declared a ruthless war on a multi-millionaire who was about to buy their entire lives, tear down their fake empires, and sell them for scrap. I stood alone in the pristine kitchen, watching the cold water wash the red wine out of my blouse. The dark stain faded into a pale pink, but the freezing coldness in my chest remained. With over $85 million sitting quietly in my bank account, I could have walked out the front door right then, bought a sprawling mansion in Beverly Hills, and never spoken to any of them again. But a lingering, foolish part of my heart wanted to know the absolute truth. I needed to know if their cruelty was just passing arrogance fueled by the holiday wine, or if they truly lacked a soul. I decided in that quiet kitchen to give them one final test. It would be a microscopic hurdle to prove if family blood actually meant anything to them when the facade was stripped away. I dried my shirt as best as I could with a paper towel and walked back into the dining room. They were already eating. No one had waited for me. Trent was loudly chewing a piece of turkey, lecturing Vanessa about his aggressive stock market portfolio. The heavy mahogany table groaned under the weight of the extravagant feast, but I had lost my appetite entirely. I walked to the end of the table and cleared my throat. The room went quiet again, but this time there was only sharp annoyance in their eyes. I forced my voice to tremble. I let my shoulders droop, playing the part of the broken, desperate woman they fully believed I was. "I need to ask you all for a massive favor," I said, keeping my eyes downcast to hide the calculation in them. "My catering business is in serious trouble. My primary equipment supplier scammed me and my landlord just served me with papers. He is threatening to lock the doors of my commercial kitchen by Monday morning. If I do not come up with $5,000 immediately to cover the arrears, I will lose my business, my equipment, and eventually my apartment. I am facing total bankruptcy. I am begging you. Can you please loan me the money? I promise I will pay it back with interest the second I get back on my feet." The silence that followed was not born of shock or sympathy. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of profound disgust. Vanessa was the first to speak. She carefully set down her heavy silver fork and dabbed her lips with a linen napkin, making sure not to smudge her expensive lipstick. $5,000, she repeated, sounding as if the words themselves tasted foul in her mouth. "Are you completely out of your mind, Chloe? Do you honestly think Trent and I are just walking ATMs for your little charity cases? I am literally on the wait list for the new seasonal Chanel caviar leather flap bag. My personal shopper finally secured it for me yesterday in Paris, and it costs exactly $5,200. You are seriously asking me to give up my Chanel bag because you do not know how to balance a basic checkbook." I looked at my older sister, My own flesh and blood, the woman I used to share a bedroom with when we were little. You are choosing a purse over my entire livelihood, I asked softly. It is an investment piece, Chloe Vanessa snapped aggressively, rolling her eyes and rattling her stack of gold Cartier bracelets. Something you would obviously not understand. Trent chimed in, leaning back in his chair and steepling his fingers together like a corporate guru preparing to drop wisdom on a peasant. Let us look at this logically, Chloe, he said, his tone dripping with condescension. In the business world, we call this throwing good money after bad. Your little kitchen operation has a negative return on investment. Why on earth would I inject hard-earned capital into a sinking ship? That is just terrible financial strategy. But since I am a generous guy and it is Thanksgiving, I will offer you a lifeline. The property management company that handles my real estate office is looking for a new night shift janitor. You know, emptying trash cans, scrubbing the lobby toilets. The pay is minimum wage, but beggars cannot be choosers. You can start on Monday night after they lock you out of your kitchen. He smiled, visibly proud of his own cruelty, looking at Vanessa for validation. She giggled. I slowly turned my gaze to my mother, my last hope. The woman who sat in the front pew of our community church every single Sunday, loudly praising the Lord and preaching about community uplift. Mom, I whispered, please. I have worked for 10 years. I will lose everything. My mother slammed her hands down on the table, making the crystal wineglasses rattle violently. How dare you! She hissed, her face contorted with pure, unfiltered rage. How dare you ruin my beautiful Thanksgiving dinner with your pathetic financial failures? You are an absolute disgrace to this family's name, Chloe. Trent is sitting here discussing high-level real estate acquisitions, and you come crawling in here begging for handouts like a common vagrant off the street. I have given you enough. I warned you that dropping out of a prestigious college to cook would leave you in the gutter. I will not give you a single dime to fund your delusions. She stood up, pointing a trembling manicured finger toward the hallway. You made your bed, and now you are going to lie in it, she shouted. If they evict you, figure it out yourself. But do not you ever embarrass me in front of my successful son-in-law again. In fact, you need to leave, right now. I cannot look at you and enjoy my meal. Get out of my house, Chloe. I absorbed every single word. I memorized the exact shape of their sneers. $5,000 was absolute pocket change to Trent and Vanessa. It was a mere fraction of what my mother spent on her exclusive country club memberships. But they would rather watch me lose my home and my decade of grueling hard work than part with a single cent. The test was officially over. They had failed spectacularly. I did not say another word. I simply turned around, grabbed my coat from the rack, and walked out the front door into the freezing November rain. The icy rain hit my face the second I stepped off my mother's pristine mahogany porch. I pulled my thin wool coat tighter around my shoulders, but the cold had already seeped into my bones. The gravel of the long driveway crunched beneath my boots as I walked toward my battered catering van parked out on the street. They had not even let me park in the driveway because Trent claimed my rusty commercial vehicle would leak oil onto the imported paving stones. I reached for the cold metal handle of the driver's side door, my mind replaying the absolute disgust on my mother's face. Chloe, wait. The voice cut through the heavy sound of the falling rain. I turned around and saw a figure jogging down the driveway, splashing through the puddles without an umbrella. It was my cousin, Malik. He is 22 years old, the son of my late aunt, and the only person in our extended family who actually knows the meaning of hard work. Since his mother passed away, he has been entirely on his own, working grueling double shifts at a local diner just to pay his tuition at the state university. His winter jacket was frayed at the cuffs, and he was shivering as he stopped in front of me, catching his breath. Malik, what are you doing out here? I asked, stepping toward him to shield him from the wind. You are going to freeze. You need to go back inside before Aunt Brenda starts yelling at you for tracking mud into her foyer. I do not care about her foyer, Malik said, his voice completely steady, despite his shivering. He reached into the deep pocket of his worn jacket and pulled out a small, crumpled wad of cash. He grabbed my hand and pressed the damp bills firmly into my palm, folding my fingers over them. "What is this?" I asked, looking down at the money. "It is $150, he said, looking me right in the eye. "I know it is nowhere near the $5,000 you need for the kitchen lease. It is my tip money from the diner this week. I was going to use it for a textbook, but I can find a used copy online or borrow one from the library. You need this more than I do right now. Please take it. Put it toward your rent, or at least put gas in this van and get yourself a hot meal tonight." I stared at the crumpled $10 and $20 bills in my hand. A massive lump formed in my throat, thick and heavy. Trent, a man who bragged about million-dollar commercial real estate deals over a $500 bottle of wine, had thrown a $20 bill on the floor like I was a stray dog. My sister, who was actively waiting to drop $5,000 on a leather purse, had laughed at my impending bankruptcy. My own mother had kicked me out into a storm. Yet here was Malik, a 22-year-old broke college student who was barely surviving on diner tips and instant noodles. He was giving me literally every single dollar he had to his name, just to make sure I had gas in my car. "Malik, I cannot take your textbook money," I whispered, trying to hand it back to him. "You work too hard for this. I will figure it out. I promise." He pushed my hand away and took a step back, shaking his head. "You are the hardest worker I know, Chloe," he said earnestly. "You built your business from the ground up while everyone else in that house had everything handed to them on a silver platter. Do not let them break your spirit tonight. You are going to get through this. You always do. Just promise me you will not give up on your cooking." I looked at his earnest, dripping wet face and felt a tear finally mix with the rain on my cheek. I closed my hand tightly around the money. "I promise," I said quietly. "Thank you, Malik. You have no idea what this means to me." "Get home safe," he said, offering a small, encouraging smile before turning around and sprinting back up the dark driveway toward the brightly lit mansion. I climbed into my cold van and slammed the heavy door shut, sealing myself inside the quiet cabin. The air smelled faintly of vanilla extract and engine oil. I did not start the ignition right away. I reached up and turned on the dim overhead dome light. I unballed the damp bills Malik had given me and smoothed them out flat against my steering wheel. $150. The ultimate proof that out of my entire bloodline, only one person possessed an actual heart. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out my phone. The screen illuminated the dark interior of the van. I bypassed my messages, ignoring a gloating text from Vanessa that simply read, "Do not ever ask us for a handout again." I opened my secure banking application. The facial recognition scanned my features, and a small loading circle spun for a fraction of a second before the main dashboard appeared. I stared at the bold black numbers glowing on the screen. Available balance: $85,400,000. It was the lump sum payout from the Powerball lottery ticket I had casually purchased at a gas station 2 weeks ago. After federal and state taxes, that was the exact amount wired into my account. For 3 days, I had walked around in a state of pure shock, wondering how to share this miraculous blessing with my family. I had fantasized about paying off my mother's mortgage, setting up a trust fund for Vanessa, and maybe even investing in Trent's business. I looked at the $85 million on my screen, and then I looked down at Malik's crumpled $150 resting on my steering wheel. A cold, razor-sharp clarity washed over my mind. All the years of seeking my mother's approval evaporated. The desire to keep the peace with my arrogant sister vanished completely. They had made their choice. They had shown me exactly who they were when they thought I had absolutely nothing to offer them. They worshipped money, status, and power, and they used those things as weapons to humiliate anyone they deemed beneath them. I turned the key in the ignition. The old van roared to life, the heater slowly blowing warm air against my cold hands. I carefully folded Malik's money and placed it in my wallet. He would never have to worry about a textbook, college tuition, or struggling for rent ever again. I was going to make sure his future was brighter than anything he could have ever imagined. As for my mother, Vanessa, and Trent, they wanted to play a ruthless game of financial superiority. They thought they held all the cards. They had no idea they had just declared war on a woman who now possessed enough capital to buy their entire miserable lives and sell them for spare parts. I shifted the van into drive and pulled away from the curb, leaving the massive colonial house in my rearview mirror. The test was over. The tears were done. The game was officially on. The Monday morning after Thanksgiving did not find me begging my landlord for an extension on my commercial kitchen lease. Instead, I parked my rusty catering van in the underground garage of the tallest, most intimidating glass skyscraper in downtown Atlanta. I stepped out of the cold parking garage and took the private executive elevator straight to the 50th floor. The polished mahogany doors slid open to reveal the reception area of Sterling and Pierce, the most ruthless and expensive wealth management law firm in the entire state. I was wearing my best tailored blazer, which was still remarkably cheap compared to the designer suits walking around the office, but my posture was entirely different. I did not shrink into the background anymore. I walked up to the marble reception desk and asked for Julian Sterling, a senior partner, whose hourly rate was probably more than I used to make in an entire month of catering events. The receptionist gave me a brief calculating look, but before she could ask for my credentials, Julian himself walked out of his corner office with a warm, respectful smile. When you have over $85 million sitting perfectly cleared in a verified banking account, people do not care if you arrived in a catering van. To them, you are royalty. I sat across a massive glass desk from Julian in an office that overlooked the sprawling city skyline. We did not waste any time on small talk. I need a ghost structure, Julian, I told him, accepting the sparkling water his assistant had poured for me. I want a parent company, several holding liability companies and blind trusts. I need an absolute fortress of anonymity. No one in my family can ever connect my name to this money. Julian nodded, his expensive fountain pen gliding smoothly across a yellow legal pad. Consider it done, Chloe. We specialize in making highly visible people completely invisible on paper. What are we naming the primary umbrella corporation? I looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the tiny cars move like ants on the highway below. Vanguard Holdings, I said. It sounded strong. It sounded like an entity that could crush a parasite without even noticing it had stepped on one. Julian set down his pen and folded his hands on the desk. Now that we are establishing the fortress, what is Vanguard Holdings going to do for its first official move? Are we looking at aggressive tech stocks, municipal bonds, or an international portfolio? I reached into the pocket of my blazer and pulled out a glossy, thick piece of cardstock. It was a promotional flyer for Trent's real estate brokerage that my mother had proudly forced into my hands a few months ago, demanding I look at what real success looked like. I slid the flyer across the smooth glass desk. I want to buy this specific commercial building, I said, pointing to the address printed in gold foil at the bottom. Julian picked up the flyer and adjusted his glasses. It was a premium mid-rise commercial property located in the absolute heart of the city's most expensive business district. Trent leased the entire third floor for his boutique real estate firm. He constantly bragged at family dinners about the prime location, using the prestigious address to lure in wealthy clients and maintain his carefully crafted illusion of elite status. He loved to complain loudly about his landlord, an older local investor who Trent claimed was too lazy to maintain the building properly. Find the owner of this building, I instructed Julian, my voice completely flat and professional. Offer him 20% over the current market value, but only on the condition of an immediate 30-day closing and an ironclad non-disclosure agreement. Pay the entire amount in cash. Do not negotiate the price down. Just give him a number he cannot possibly refuse and get me the deed to that property by the end of the week. Julian raised an eyebrow, clearly impressed by the aggressive and unorthodox tactic. Buying prime commercial property to become a landlord is a very solid long-term strategy, he said, making a quick note on his pad. But you are paying a heavy premium for a rushed close. Is there a specific reason you want this exact building so quickly? I leaned back in my plush leather chair and smiled. It was a cold, genuine smile that reached my eyes. Because my arrogant brother-in-law leases his massive corner office there, I said. He loves to act like he owns the world. He loves to throw $20 bills at me and tell me to go scrub toilets for minimum wage. I think it is time he actually starts paying rent directly to me. Over the next 48 hours, I watched the terrifying true power of extreme wealth go to work. Julian and his team descended on the property owner with absolute precision. By Wednesday afternoon, the paperwork was completely finalized. The exhausted building owner was absolutely thrilled to walk away with a massive all-cash buyout that secured his retirement instantly, and he happily signed the strict non-disclosure agreements without asking a single question. My real name was deeply buried under 3 separate layers of corporate shielding. To the outside world and to the tenants inside the building had simply been acquired by a faceless, deep-pocketed corporate entity called Vanguard Holdings. On Friday evening, I sat alone in my small, cramped apartment, staring at the thick stack of legal documents Julian had couriered over to me. The heavy parchment paper felt substantial and heavy in my hands. I ran my fingers over the official embossed corporate seals. In less than a week, my entire reality had shifted. I pictured Trent sitting in his overpriced ergonomic office chair, at that very moment probably sipping an expensive espresso and barking condescending orders at his assistants. He was completely oblivious to the fact that the very floor beneath his Italian leather shoes now belonged to the sister-in-law he had humiliated. He had mocked my small kitchen. He had told me I was nothing but a glorified servant. Now Vanguard Holdings was his sole landlord. I held his commercial corporate lease right in my hands. I read through every single clause. I had the power to raise his rent aggressively, audit his usage of the space, or evict his entire operation the moment he violated a single term in his contract. The trap was officially set, and the board was arranged exactly how I wanted it. But I knew my family's greed. I knew I did not even have to lift a finger to destroy Trent, because a man that arrogant was bound to destroy himself. All I had to do was wait for them to make the next move. I did not have to wait long for them to make their next move. Early Tuesday morning, my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. The caller ID flashed my mother's name. I let it ring 3 times before I answered, making sure my voice sounded suitably defeated when I finally said hello. My mother did not bother with pleasantries. She demanded I come over to the house immediately, claiming she had found a solution to my pathetic financial situation. I drove my catering van back to the upscale neighborhood, purposefully parking it right on the street where Trent hated seeing it. When I walked through the heavy front doors, my mother was sitting in her formal living room. She was sipping herbal tea from a delicate porcelain cup, looking at me with an expression that perfectly mixed maternal disappointment with absolute disgust. She gestured for me to sit on the edge of the sofa, making sure I did not get too comfortable. I have been speaking with Trent about your little eviction problem. My mother began setting her teacup down on the glass coffee table. He is such a forgiving man, Chloe. Even after you embarrassed him at Thanksgiving, he is still trying to help you. We have come up with a realistic exit strategy for you. I kept my face perfectly blank, resting my hands in my lap. What kind of strategy? I asked quietly. Since you are going to lose that commercial kitchen space by the end of the week anyway, there is no point in dragging this out, she said smoothly. You need to sell off everything immediately. I want you to liquidate your commercial ovens, your industrial mixers, and that hideous rusty van parked outside. Sell it all to the highest bidder by Friday. You should be able to scrape together at least $10,000 or $15,000 if you do not act too desperate with the buyers. I narrowed my eyes slightly. And what exactly am I supposed to do with that money once I have sold my entire livelihood? My mother smiled, a sharp, predatory look that made my stomach turn. You are going to give every single penny of it to Trent, she said proudly. He is putting together a highly exclusive closed-door investment portfolio for his top-tier clients. It is a massive commercial real estate fund. Normally, the minimum buy-in is $500,000. But because you are family, he is willing to pool your meager little equipment money into his personal investment tier. He is practically handing you free interest, Chloe. I stared at her, genuinely stunned by the audacity. My own mother was demanding I sell the tools I used to feed myself just to hand the cash over to her arrogant son-in-law. But beneath the shock, my newly sharpened business instincts flared to life. Something was incredibly wrong here. A highly successful real estate mogul who regularly closes multi-million-dollar deals does not need $10,000 from his bankrupt sister-in-law. He definitely does not ask his mother-in-law to bully her own daughter into selling used baking sheets to fund a supposedly elite portfolio. Trent is doing you a massive favor, my mother continued, misinterpreting my silence for hesitation. You need to wake up and look at the real world, Chloe. Trent is an educated white man with a master's degree in finance. He moves in circles of power and wealth that you and I could never even dream of accessing on our own. He understands how the system works. He knows how to multiply capital. You, on the other hand, are just selling party snacks and wiping down greasy counters. You have no head for business. If you keep holding on to this ridiculous cooking dream, you will end up homeless. Let a real man handle the money. The internalized racism and profound classism in her words hung heavily in the quiet living room. She worshipped Trent simply because he fit her aesthetic of what success was supposed to look like. A tall, loud white man in a tailored suit who threw around buzzwords and flashed expensive watches. She was so blinded by her desperation for high society validation that she was willing to sacrifice her own flesh and blood to keep him happy. Will you be investing in this new portfolio too? Mom, I asked, keeping my tone perfectly innocent and curious. My mother puffed up her chest, looking incredibly smug. Of course I am. I am giving him a substantial amount of capital. It is called building generational wealth, Chloe. Something you would know nothing about. Now I want you to go list your equipment online right now. Do not make me regret trying to save you from your own failures. I stood up from the sofa. My mind was racing, connecting the dots at lightning speed. Trent was not building a new portfolio. Trent was aggressively liquidating the assets of the women in my family. He was shaking the couch cushions for spare change, and he was using my mother's blinding favoritism to do it. I will get right on it, Mom, I said softly, looking down at the floor to hide the sharp, predatory gleam in my own eyes. Thank you for the advice. Tell Trent I appreciate his generous offer. I walked out of the house and got back into my van. The moment I closed the heavy door, I pulled out my phone and dialed Julian Sterling's private number. My lawyer answered on the first ring. Julian, I said, my voice cold and commanding. I need you to hire the best private financial investigator your firm has on retainer. Put them on Trent right now. I want to know exactly where his money is going. I want his bank statements, his tax returns, his outstanding debts, and I want to know exactly what he has been doing with my mother's finances. I think my arrogant brother-in-law is broke, and I think he is stealing from my family to cover his tracks. I hung up the phone and started the engine. Trent wanted to play real estate mogul. He wanted my mother to view him as the brilliant white knight of finance. But I was about to drag all of his dirty secrets directly into the harsh, unforgiving light. 48 hours later, I was sitting back in the plush leather chair in Julian Sterling's corner office. The spectacular view of the Atlanta skyline was completely lost on me this time. My absolute focus was fixed on the thick manila folder resting squarely in the middle of his pristine glass desk. Julian was not smiling today. He looked at me with the serious, calculating expression of a man who dealt with high-level corporate fraud on a daily basis. I put our best forensic financial investigator on your brother-in-law, Julian said, tapping the heavy folder with his index finger. You have exceptionally good instincts, Chloe. Trent is not a real estate mogul. He is not even a moderately successful broker. The man is a walking financial natural disaster waiting to happen. I leaned forward and opened the folder. The first page was a complex web of bank statements, wire transfers, and shell companies. Explain it to me plainly, I said, keeping my voice perfectly calm. Trent is running a classic Ponzi scheme, Julian stated bluntly. He has not actually purchased a single piece of commercial real estate in over 3 years. He has been targeting wealthy, financially illiterate individuals in his social circles. He promises them exclusive access to high-yield commercial portfolios, takes their capital, and uses it to fund his absurdly lavish lifestyle. To keep the illusion going, he uses the money from new investors to pay fake dividend returns to the older investors. I stared at the pages in absolute disgust. He was driving a $100,000 imported sports car, drinking $500 bottles of wine, and wearing tailored suits, all paid for by stolen money. He had built his entire identity around being the financial savior of our family, the educated white genius who knew how the world truly worked. My mother practically worshipped the ground he walked on, because he represented the pinnacle of elite status she so desperately craved. And it was all a pathetic criminal lie. It gets worse, Julian continued, leaning back in his chair and steepling his fingers. A Ponzi scheme only survives as long as new money keeps flowing in. The moment the market tightens or people start asking to withdraw their principal, the whole house of cards collapses. Trent is completely out of new investors. His old clients are starting to demand their returns. He is currently drowning in over $7 million of unsecured debt, and the private lenders he has been borrowing from are not the kind of people who politely accept late payments. He is desperate. I flipped to the next page in the dossier. My eyes landed on a familiar address. It was my mother, Brenda's sprawling colonial house. The house my late father had worked his entire life to pay off in full, so his family would always have a secure roof over their heads. Attached to the property record was a massive, terrifying number. "What is this?" I asked, my blood running cold, as I traced the numbers with my finger. "That is how desperate he is," Julian said quietly. "2 months ago, Trent convinced your mother to take out a massive line of credit against the equity of her fully paid-off home. He acted as the broker. He told her it was a temporary maneuver to secure a highly lucrative commercial bid, promising to pay off the loan within 90 days, with double the interest. Your mother signed all the paperwork. She essentially handed the bank the deed to her house, and Trent immediately drained the entire cash amount to pay off a group of aggressive private investors who were threatening to sue him. The silence in the office was deafening. I felt a strange, terrifying mixture of absolute fury and hollow vindication. Just 2 days ago, my mother had sat in her formal living room sipping herbal tea and called me a disgrace. She had demanded I sell my catering equipment, the only honest way I made a living, just to give this con artist more cash. She had looked me dead in the eye and told me I was going to end up homeless because I did not understand how to build generational wealth. Meanwhile, she had blindly signed away her own home to a man simply because he wore the right suit and spoke with unearned confidence. She had mortgaged her entire future to protect the illusion of his success. If Trent defaulted on that massive loan, which he absolutely was going to do, the bank would foreclose on her house. She would be thrown out onto the street with nothing but her designer clothes and her unbearable pride. "What happens when the authorities find out?" I asked, closing the folder and looking back up at Julian. "When the Securities and Exchange Commission eventually catches up to him, he is looking at a minimum of 10 to 15 years in federal prison for wire fraud and money laundering," Julian replied smoothly. "But right now, his immediate problem is cash flow. He needs a massive capital injection just to keep the private lenders from destroying him and to stop his clients from going to the police. Our investigator flagged some activity this morning. Trent is actively shopping around for a $10 million emergency bridge loan." I sat back in my chair and took a deep breath. The pieces of the puzzle were falling perfectly into place. Trent was backed into a corner, bleeding out financially and frantically searching for a lifeline. He was trying to find a massive private investment fund willing to look the other way and hand him $10 million without asking too many questions. "Julian," I said, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across my face, "I need Vanguard Holdings to step out of the shadows. I want you to reach out to Trent's brokerage firm under the guise of our corporate umbrella. Let him know that Vanguard is a private equity firm, currently looking for aggressive high-yield debt opportunities. Julian raised an eyebrow, a knowing smirk playing on his lips. You want to be his lifeline. I do not want to be his lifeline, I corrected softly. I want to be the anvil he ties around his own neck. Offer him the $10 million he is begging for. Make the terms look incredibly appealing on the surface so his greed blinds him. But I want the collateral requirements to be absolute and ruthless. Consider it done, Chloe, Julian said, pulling a fresh legal pad toward him. What exactly are we demanding for collateral? I stood up from the chair, smoothing down my blazer. Everything I said coldly. I want him to personally guarantee the loan. I want his business assets, his remaining bank accounts, his luxury vehicles, and his personal freedom tied to this contract. When he inevitably defaults, I do not just want his company, I want his entire life. Have the contract drafted by tonight. We are going to let him dig his own grave, and then we are going to hand him the shovel. By Tuesday afternoon, the trap was officially set. Julian Sterling did exactly what I paid him to do. He reached out to Trent's struggling brokerage firm, introducing Vanguard Holdings as an aggressive private equity group looking to deploy capital quickly. As expected, Trent leaped at the bait like a starving dog. He was so blinded by his own desperation and his massive ego that he did not even question why a supposedly elite financial firm was suddenly interested in him. He just saw a $10 million lifeline dangling right in front of his face. Julian called me to review the final draft of the lending agreement before presenting it to Trent. We went over every single line of the contract. The terms we established were absolutely brutal. On paper, the interest rate was deceptively reasonable, which was exactly the shiny distraction Trent needed. But buried in the dense, heavily disguised legal jargon was the death clause. We demanded a comprehensive personal guarantee. If Trent missed a single payment, or if Vanguard discovered any fraudulent representations in his financial disclosures, we had the absolute legal right to bypass the courts and immediately seize everything. I made sure Julian listed the collateral with terrifying specificity. We claimed the rights to his commercial business assets, his personal investment accounts, his imported luxury vehicles, and every single piece of jewelry in his possession. But the crowning jewel of the contract was the cross-collateralization clause tying his debt directly to my mother's mortgaged house. He was signing away his entire existence. We also included a strict waiver of bankruptcy protection, meaning he could not just file for Chapter 11 to hide from us. If he defaulted, Vanguard Holdings would legally own the shirt off his back. Are you absolutely certain about this? Chloe Julian asked over the phone, his voice laced with professional caution. I have drafted aggressive contracts before, but this is a financial guillotine. If he signs this, he is effectively selling himself into indentured servitude. I am completely certain, I replied, looking out the window of my small apartment. He is a predator, Julian. He has been stealing from innocent people to fund his fake elite lifestyle, and he actively preyed on my mother's insecurities to steal her home. I am not ruining him. I am simply handing him the rope. What he chooses to do with it is entirely up to him. Send the contract to his office. The signing took place the very next morning at Julian's downtown office. I obviously could not be in the room, but I required Julian to keep a secure conference line open so I could listen to the entire exchange. Sitting at my cramped kitchen table, I put my phone on speaker and listened to the loud, confident voice of my brother-in-law echo through the line. Trent sounded so incredibly arrogant. He laughed loudly, making arrogant jokes about the current real estate market, acting as if taking a $10 million emergency loan was just a casual networking event. He tried to impress Julian by name-dropping local politicians and bragging about imaginary commercial developments he claimed were in his pipeline. Julian, being the consummate professional, simply humored him, allowing Trent to inflate his own ego while sliding the massive stack of legal documents across the conference table. I held my breath as I listened to the sound of pages turning. A smart businessman would have brought his own legal counsel to review a $10 million bridge loan. A cautious man would have spent hours reading the fine print. But Trent was neither smart nor cautious. He was a desperate narcissist who believed he was the smartest person in any room. He completely ignored the collateral schedules. He skipped right over the default clauses. He was only focused on the signature line that would release the funds. I could hear the heavy scratch of Julian's expensive fountain pen as Trent hastily signed his name. "There you go, Julian," Trent said, his voice dripping with forced bravado. "It is a pleasure doing business with Vanguard Holdings. You boys are making a very smart investment today. My portfolio is bulletproof. I look forward to making you a lot of money." "The pleasure is entirely ours," Julian replied smoothly, his tone completely unreadable. "The funds will be wired to your primary corporate account within the hour." I ended the call and set my phone face down on the table. A cold, heavy sense of satisfaction settled deep in my chest. He actually did it. He signed the death warrant without a single second thought. Less than an hour later, I received an encrypted confirmation from my bank. $10 million had been officially transferred from Vanguard Holdings to Trent's failing brokerage firm. To Trent, that money felt like salvation. He probably believed he had just outsmarted a faceless corporate giant. He probably thought he was going to use that money to pay off his angry private lenders, silence the people threatening to expose his Ponzi scheme, and go right back to living his lavish, fraudulent life. He had no idea that he had just handed the absolute control of his destiny over to the sister-in-law he considered a pathetic servant. He thought he had bought himself a clean slate, but all he had really done was lock himself inside a burning building and hand me the only key. The trap was sprung, and now I just had to wait for the pressure to build. But before I could even begin to tighten the noose around his neck, the family drama was about to escalate to a level I had not anticipated. They were about to make a move so incredibly toxic, it would test every single ounce of my patience and push me closer to the edge than I ever thought possible. The $10 million Vanguard Holdings wired to Trent did exactly what I wanted it to do. It gave him a massive, intoxicating dose of false hope before the ground completely crumbled beneath his feet. 2 days after he signed his life away, Julian called me with an update that made me smile into my morning coffee. Trent had immediately taken $7 million of the loan and wired it directly to the dangerous private lenders he owed. He was frantically trying to plug the holes in his sinking ship. But in his rush to pay off his debts, he made a fatal error. Moving that much unregistered capital across multiple offshore and domestic accounts in a single afternoon triggered a massive red flag within his own brokerage firm. Julian informed me that Trent's chief compliance officer had abruptly resigned that morning, refusing to sign off on the chaotic ledgers. Worse yet, the sudden influx of Vanguard capital had triggered an automatic internal audit protocol. Trent was now desperately trying to hide his Ponzi scheme tracks from his own accounting department, terrified that they would report him to the Securities and Exchange Commission. His corporate accounts were temporarily frozen pending the audit review, leaving him completely devoid of liquid cash. The brilliant real estate mogul was suddenly suffocating, and the pressure was beginning to crack his carefully polished exterior. Of course, he did not tell any of this to his wife. Vanessa operated under the firm delusion that her husband was a financial god who had just closed another massive lucrative deal. She had heard him bragging on the phone about the Vanguard capital injection, and in her mind that meant it was time to celebrate. That Thursday afternoon, I was at an upscale outdoor shopping plaza, picking up specialty imported spices for a client event. As I walked past the massive glass windows of the Neiman Marcus department store, I heard a painfully familiar shrill voice echoing all the way out into the promenade. I stopped and looked through the glass. There was Vanessa standing at the designer handbag counter, dressed in a flawless silk blouse and oversized sunglasses. She was currently screaming at a terrified-looking sales associate. I pushed the heavy glass doors open just enough to hear the absolute train wreck unfolding. "I do not care what your little machine says," Vanessa shrieked, slamming her hand down on the glass display case. "Run it again! My husband is Trent Lawson. He owns half the commercial real estate in this city." There is no possible way my platinum card is declining for a measly $6,000 transaction. Your system is obviously broken. The sales associate, a young woman who looked like she was on the verge of tears, nervously slid the sleek metal card back across the counter. "I am so sorry, ma'am," she whispered. "I have run it 3 times. The bank is returning a hard decline code. It says the account is completely locked due to insufficient funds and outstanding balances. If you have another form of payment, I would be happy to try that." Vanessa snatched the card back, her face flushing a deep, embarrassed crimson as several wealthy shoppers stopped to stare at the commotion. She frantically dug into her designer purse and pulled out a gold credit card, tossing it onto the counter. "Fine use, that one," she snapped. The associate swiped it. The machine beeped a loud, harsh red. "Declined." Vanessa pulled out a third card. "Declined." The illusion of her endless wealth was shattering right there in the middle of the luxury handbag department. People were whispering. The security guard was slowly inching closer. I watched my sister, the woman who had mocked my catering business and told me I was nothing but a servant, hyperventilate over a leather purse she could no longer afford. She grabbed her cards, hurled a string of vicious insults at the cashier, and stormed out of the store, furiously dialing her phone. I quietly stepped behind a marble pillar, letting her march past me in a cloud of expensive perfume and pure panic. Less than an hour later, my own phone rang. It was my mother. She did not say hello. She was practically hyperventilating, her voice thick with tears and absolute hysteria. "Chloe, get over here right now. It is an absolute emergency." I drove my van back to the sprawling colonial house, mentally preparing myself for whatever absurd theatrical performance they were about to put on. When I walked into the kitchen, the scene was almost comical. Vanessa was sitting at the marble island, sobbing uncontrollably into her hands, her mascara running down her face. My mother was pacing the floor aggressively, fanning herself with a magazine. "What happened?" I asked, keeping my voice flat and completely devoid of sympathy. "It is a disaster," my mother cried out, rushing over to me and grabbing my arm. "Trent is dealing with a massive banking error. His new multi-million-dollar Vanguard deal triggered some sort of security hold, and all of his operational accounts are temporarily frozen. The bank literally locked his cards without warning." Vanessa was humiliated at Neiman Marcus today. Humiliated Chloe. She had to leave a custom bag right on the counter in front of everyone. I stared at her, genuinely astounded. "Your daughter just experienced public embarrassment over a luxury handbag, and you called me here acting like someone died. You do not understand." My mother snapped, her eyes wide with frantic desperation. "We have the annual community church banquet this Sunday. Trent and Vanessa are supposed to be the guests of honor. They are supposed to host the VIP table. Trent needs liquid cash immediately to clear the credit card holds and pay off an aggressive auditor who is threatening to ruin his business reputation over this stupid banking error. He is under so much stress, Chloe. We have to save his face. We have to protect the family image." I crossed my arms. "And how exactly am I supposed to help with that? You both made it perfectly clear at Thanksgiving that I am a broke, glorified servant." My mother stopped pacing and looked at me with a cold, terrifyingly calculating expression. "I know you do not have savings, Chloe. But you have that catering van, and you have a clean credit history because you never buy anything." My stomach turned as I realized exactly what she was about to say. "There is a title loan agency down on 8th Street," my mother continued, speaking rapidly. "They do high-interest, same-day cash loans. You just sign the title of your van over to them as collateral. They will give you $15,000 in cash today. You give that money to Trent right now so he can fix this audit mess and unlock Vanessa's cards." I stood there in absolute silence, letting the sheer, unfiltered toxicity of her demand wash over me. She wanted me to drive to a predatory lending agency. She wanted me to sign away the only vehicle I owned, the literal lifeline of my business, and take on a loan with a staggering 300 or 400% interest rate. She wanted me to risk absolute financial ruin just so my arrogant brother-in-law could bribe an auditor and my sister could go back to the mall. You want me to take out a payday loan in my own name to fund Trent's lifestyle, I asked, making sure to enunciate every single word so she could hear exactly how insane she sounded. It is just for a few days, Vanessa sobbed from the kitchen island, looking up at me with puffy red eyes. As soon as the Vanguard escrow clears, Trent will pay you back, probably with a massive bonus for helping out. You owe us this, Chloe. You owe this family. I owe you. I repeated, a cold, sharp laugh escaping my lips. I owe you nothing. When I asked you for $5,000 to save my business, you told me to go scrub toilets. Now you want me to pawn my car so you can buy a purse and Trent can pay off a shady auditor. My mother stepped forward, her face twisting into an ugly mask of rage. How dare you throw the past in our faces when your brother-in-law is suffering? This is about family honor, Chloe. Trent is an important man. He provides status for all of us. If he goes down, if people find out his cards are bouncing, it ruins my reputation in this entire community. You will go down to that loan office right now, or you will no longer be a part of this family. I looked at the two of them. They were pathetic. They were drowning in the shallow end of a pool they built themselves. I did not yell. I did not argue. I just looked at my mother with dead, empty eyes. I am not taking out a loan, I said quietly, turning toward the door. Tell Trent to figure it out himself. He is an educated white man, right? Let a real man handle the money. I walked out of the house, ignoring my mother's furious screaming behind me. I climbed into my van and locked the doors. The facade was officially cracking. Trent was bleeding out, Vanessa was exposed, and my mother was losing her mind trying to hold the pieces together. They were so desperate they were willing to throw me to the wolves. They had no idea that I was already the one controlling the pack. The audit was just the beginning. I was about to turn up the heat, and they were all going to burn. Sunday evening arrived, bringing with it the most anticipated event of the year for my mother. The Greater Hope Fellowship annual fundraising banquet was the crown jewel of the local African American community in Atlanta. It was a massive, elegant affair held in the church's opulent Grand Hall, attended by local politicians, business owners, and the city's elite. For my mother, this was her personal red carpet. It was her yearly opportunity to parade her successful white son-in-law and her impeccably dressed golden child daughter in front of the entire congregation to prove her superior social standing. For me, it was just another grueling work shift. My catering company had been hired to provide the food for the evening, a contract I had secured at a steep discount, simply because I genuinely respected the pastor and wanted to give back to the church. I spent the entire afternoon in the hot industrial kitchen, wearing my black chef coat and a tight hairnet, directing my small staff as we prepared hundreds of plates of braised short ribs and garlic mashed potatoes. From the swinging kitchen doors, I had a perfect view of the VIP table, situated right at the front of the hall. My mother, Vanessa, and Trent arrived fashionably late to ensure maximum attention. Trent was wearing a sharply tailored navy suit, but his usual arrogant swagger looked slightly forced today. I could see the fine sheen of sweat on his forehead. He kept checking his phone under the table, his jaw tightly clenched. His bank accounts were still completely frozen by the internal audit Vanguard Holdings had triggered. He was a man walking on a financial tightrope, but he was desperately trying to act like he still owned the circus. Vanessa sat next to him, wearing a brand new designer dress she had undoubtedly purchased before her credit cards were humiliatingly declined at the mall. She smiled tightly, waving at the other prominent families, completely oblivious to the fact that her husband was drowning in a $10 million trap. My mother sat up perfectly straight, radiating smug satisfaction as church members stopped by to admire them. After the dinner service concluded and my team began quietly clearing the plates, Pastor Williams took the stage to commence the fundraising portion of the evening. The church was trying to raise money to build a new community youth center. As the pledge drive began, several prominent deacons and local business owners stood up proudly, announcing donations of $500 or $1,000. The crowd clapped politely after each announcement. Then Trent stood up. He unbuttoned his suit jacket, projecting an air of absolute authority. He grabbed the microphone from a passing usher. The entire hall of over 300 people went completely silent. Trent cleared his throat and offered a patronizing, practiced smile. Pastor Williams Trent's voice boomed through the speakers, echoing off the high vaulted ceilings. Family is everything. Community is everything. My beautiful wife Vanessa and my incredible mother-in-law Brenda have taught me the true value of giving back to this wonderful congregation. We have been incredibly blessed in the commercial real estate market this year. And because to whom much is given, much is required, the Lawson family would like to pledge $50,000 to the new youth center. The grand hall erupted into thunderous applause. My mother pressed her hand to her chest, beaming with absolute pride, as people at the neighboring tables nodded to her in deep respect. Vanessa looked at Trent like he was a superhero. It was the ultimate performance of wealth and status. But I stood near the back wall, holding a tray of empty water glasses, watching the absolute terror hidden behind Trent's confident smile. I knew exactly what he was doing. He was buying time and reputation. In his desperate mind, he assumed the church would just send him an invoice in the mail next week, giving him a few days to figure out a way to unfreeze his accounts. He just wanted the public glory right now. But Pastor Williams smiled warmly from the stage and threw a massive wrench into Trent's plan. Brother Trent, that is an incredibly generous blessing, the pastor said enthusiastically. We actually have the portable payment terminals right here tonight to finalize the building fund ledger before the evening ends. Deacon Hayes will bring the machine right to your table. Let us give God a hand clap of praise for this man's generosity. Trent's face instantly drained of all color. He looked like he had just been punched in the stomach. Deacon Hayes, a stern, no-nonsense older man, walked directly up to the VIP table holding a wireless credit card terminal. He held it out toward Trent with a polite smile. "Whenever you are ready, sir." The entire room was watching. My mother was watching. Vanessa was watching. Trent slowly reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a sleek, heavy metal credit card. His hand was visibly shaking. He inserted the chip into the bottom of the machine. The machine processed for 3 excruciatingly long seconds. Then a loud, sharp beep echoed from the device. A bright red light flashed. "Declined," Deacon Hayes said quietly, furrowing his brow. "Sometimes these machines are tricky with large daily limits. Do you want to try another card, Brother Trent?" Trent swallowed hard. He pulled out a second card, the exact same one I knew had bounced at Neiman Marcus. He inserted it. Beep, red light, declined. The applause in the room had completely died down. A heavy, awkward silence fell over the grand hall. People at the surrounding tables began to whisper. My mother's proud smile completely vanished, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated horror. She looked at Trent as if he had just slapped her. Vanessa gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles turning white. "Try it again." Trent snapped his voice, losing its smooth polish and cracking with panic. "Run it again. There is plenty of money in that account. Your machine is broken." "I am sorry, sir," the deacon replied, his tone turning slightly cooler. "The terminal is returning a hard code. It says the accounts are frozen due to internal holds." The whispers in the room grew louder. The illusion of the great wealthy white savior was disintegrating in real time in front of the most important people in my mother's life. Trent looked around wildly. He looked at my mother's furious, panicked face. He looked at the judging eyes of the congregation. He was cornered, humiliated, and desperate. He needed a scapegoat, and he needed one instantly. His wild eyes scanned the room and landed directly on me, standing in my black chef coat near the kitchen doors. A dark, vicious look crossed his face. He pointed his finger straight at me, his voice booming across the quiet room. "Her," he shouted, his face turning red with manufactured rage. "She did it." Every single head in the grand hall snapped in my direction. I froze, my hands tightly gripping the edges of the serving tray. My sister-in-law, Chloe Trent, yelled, stepping away from the VIP table and aggressively walking toward the center aisle so everyone could hear him. She was in the coat room earlier when I arrived. I thought I misplaced my primary wallet, but she stole it. She stole my black card. That is why my secondary accounts are locked. I had to freeze everything this afternoon because she is a thief. A collective gasp echoed through the church. Trent continued his frantic, desperate lie, leaning fully into his performance. She has been begging our family for money for weeks because her pathetic little catering business is going bankrupt. She asked me for a handout on Thanksgiving, and when I told her no, she decided to steal from me. She is a criminal. Call the police right now. Vanessa instantly jumped up from her chair, perfectly playing the role of the outraged victim. I cannot believe you, Chloe, she shrieked, pointing at me. We let you cater this event out of pity, and you steal from my husband. My mother stood up, her face a mask of absolute fury. She did not even question the logic of the accusation. She just immediately chose the side that protected her social standing. You are a disgrace to this family, my mother yelled across the room, her voice echoing off the walls. I knew you were desperate, but I never thought you would sink to common thievery. I stood completely still under the harsh chandeliers. 300 pairs of eyes were staring at me with a mixture of shock, pity, and disgust. Trent stood in the center aisle, breathing heavily, looking incredibly smug. He thought he had successfully deflected his financial ruin by throwing the poor, struggling caterer directly under the bus. He thought I would cry. He thought I would frantically deny it and look even more guilty. But I did not drop my tray. I did not shed a single tear. I just looked directly into Trent's panicked, lying eyes, and I offered him a cold, razor-sharp smile. Before I could even open my mouth to verbally destroy Trent in front of the entire congregation, another voice cut through the thick, tense silence of the grand hall. She did not steal your wallet, you lying coward. The crowd parted as Malik stepped directly into the center aisle. My 22-year-old cousin was wearing a simple, inexpensive button-down shirt and a borrowed tie, but he stood taller and commanded more respect in that moment than Trent ever could in his tailored designer suits. Malik marched straight up to the VIP table and positioned himself firmly between me and Trent, acting as a human shield. Chloe has been in the kitchen the entire evening, Malik stated, his voice ringing out clear and steady. She does not even have pockets in those chef pants. The coat room has been locked since dinner started, and the only person holding the key is Deacon Hayes. You are standing in the house of God, lying to everyone to cover up the fact that your own bank cut you off. A collective murmur rolled through the church. People started connecting the dots. Malik was absolutely right, and his undeniable logic backed Trent straight into a corner. But when an arrogant narcissist is backed into a corner, they do not apologize, they attack. And Trent, a wealthy white man, being publicly humiliated by a young, broke black college student, completely lost whatever fragile grip he had left on his composure. Trent took a step toward Malik, his face twisted in an ugly, visceral sneer. Listen to me, boy, Trent hissed deliberately, choosing a word loaded with centuries of racial disrespect. Do you really think anyone in this room is going to take the word of a broke, fatherless kid, flipping burgers over a man who actually builds this city? You are nothing but a charity case. You go to a third-tier state school, you live in a dorm that smells like cheap noodles, and you are defending a woman who cleans up my garbage. You are both pathetic losers who will never amount to anything more than the dirt on the bottom of my Italian shoes. The blatant racism and classism hung in the air, heavy and toxic. I looked at my mother, waiting for her to finally snap out of her delusion. This white man had just openly disrespected her nephew, a boy sharing her own bloodline, right in the middle of a black church. But my mother did nothing. She looked away, staring at the floor, choosing to protect her proximity to white wealth over the dignity of her own family. Vanessa, however, did not stay silent. She stood up, her eyes blazing with petty fury. How dare you speak to my husband that way, Malik, she shrieked, pointing her manicured finger right at his face. He was about to donate $50,000 to your community, and this is how you repay him. You are a disrespectful little brat. You are just as jealous and bitter as Chloe. I had heard enough. I gently placed my hand on Malik's shoulder, and pulled him back. He had already risked too much for me. I looked at the pastor, then at the congregation, and finally at Trent. "Your accounts are frozen because you are a fraud, Trent," I said quietly, my voice carrying effortlessly across the silent room. "And very soon, everyone in this city is going to know exactly what you truly are." I grabbed Malik's arm and we walked out of the grand hall together. No one tried to stop us. The heavy wooden doors of the church closed behind us, shutting out the whispers and the toxic spectacle. In the parking lot, I hugged Malik tightly, thanking him for his bravery. He smiled, telling me it was the right thing to do. We parted ways that night, believing the worst of the drama was over. We had absolutely no idea how vindictive Vanessa could truly be. The next afternoon, I was at my apartment reviewing the Vanguard Holdings portfolio when my phone rang. It was Malik. The moment I answered, my heart dropped into my stomach. He was not just crying. He was sobbing, his breaths coming in short, panicked gasps. "Malik, what is wrong?" I demanded, jumping up from my chair. "Where are you?" "I am at the campus library." He choked out, his voice completely broken. "Chloe, they took it. They took everything. I just got out of a meeting with the dean of the business school. My summer internship at the downtown accounting firm was completely revoked." I froze. That internship was not just a job. It was a highly competitive, prestigious placement that Malik had spent 2 years studying for. More importantly, it was attached to a corporate sponsorship that paid for his entire senior year tuition. Without it, he could not afford to graduate. Why, I asked, my blood turning to absolute ice. "You had the highest grade point average in your cohort." The dean said a very prominent university donor and alumni board member filed a formal character complaint against me this morning. Malik explained, his voice trembling with despair. The complaint stated I was aggressive, unstable, and a liability to any corporate environment. The accounting firm pulled the offer immediately. They said they cannot associate with a student who has disciplinary red flags. Chloe, the donor who filed the complaint, was Vanessa. I slowly sat back down in my chair. The room started to spin, replaced by a cold, blinding rage unlike anything I had ever experienced in my entire life. Vanessa had graduated from that exact same university a decade ago. She sat on their alumni advisory board and regularly attended their high society networking galas. Because Malik had dared to stand up for me and embarrass her fraudulent husband, she had weaponized her social status to completely destroy a 22-year-old kid's future. She knew he had no money. She knew he had no parents to fight for him. She knew revoking that internship meant he would be forced to drop out of college and work at a diner for the rest of his life. She did it purely out of spite. "I am going to have to pack up my dorm, Chloe." Malik whispered, the utter defeat in his voice, shattering my heart. "I cannot afford next semester. I do not know what I am going to do." "Listen to me, Malik," I said, my voice dropping an octave, filled with a dark, terrifying certainty. "You are not packing anything. You are going to go back to your dorm. You are going to open your textbooks, and you are going to study for your final exams. You are not dropping out." "But Chloe, the tuition," he protested weakly. I said, "Do not worry about it." I interrupted firmly. "I promise you on my life you will graduate. Just trust me." I hung up the phone and stared blankly at the wall. For 35 years, I had absorbed my family's insults. I had let them mock my clothes, my career, and my bank account. I had tolerated their arrogance because I foolishly believed that beneath all the toxic behavior, there was still some invisible line of family loyalty they would never cross. Vanessa had just obliterated that line. She had tried to ruin an innocent boy who was already struggling just to survive. I picked up my phone again and dialed Julian Sterling's private number. He answered on the second ring. "Julian," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "Yes, Chloe," he replied, instantly sensing the dangerous shift in my tone. "Trent's $10 million loan from Vanguard Holdings," I stated flatly. The contract stipulates that if Vanguard discovers any material misrepresentations in his financial disclosures, we can immediately trigger the default clause and seize his assets. Correct. That is correct, Julian confirmed, and our investigators have already found dozens of fraudulent misrepresentations in the paperwork he submitted to us. We could legally drop the hammer on him today if we wanted to. Do not drop the hammer today. I instructed, my eyes fixed on the Atlanta skyline outside my window. He is hosting a massive corporate gala at the St. Regis Hotel this Saturday to reassure his investors and celebrate the Vanguard capital injection. I am supposed to be in the kitchen catering it for free. I want you to prepare the asset seizure documents, draft the foreclosure papers for his business, his accounts, and my mother's house. I paused, letting a cold, ruthless smile touch my lips. Have the entire legal team put on their best suits, Julian. We are going to crash a party. The next morning, I walked into Julian Sterling's office. The atmosphere was charged with a clinical lethal efficiency. Spread across his massive glass desk were the default execution documents. This was the financial death sentence. Trent had already signed his soul away when he took the $10 million a few days ago. But today, I was officially pulling the trigger on the trap. Julian pointed to the top document. Trent committed felony fraud on his initial application by listing assets he did not actually own, Julian explained smoothly. Furthermore, his frantic attempt to wire $7 million to offshore private lenders violated our strict capital use clauses. The breach of contract is absolute and undeniable. By signing this affidavit, you give my team the legal authority to seize his brokerage firm, freeze every single personal account attached to his social security number, and officially claim the deed to your mother's house. I picked up the heavy fountain pen. I thought about Malik sitting in his dorm room, his dreams crushed because my sister wanted to feel powerful. I thought about my mother willing to let me pawn my catering van for a predatory loan just to save face in front of her country club friends. And I thought about Trent, a man who built an entire empire on lies, arrogance, and the suffering of innocent people. I pressed the gold tip of the pen to the heavy parchment paper and signed my name. It was done. The guillotine was officially released, suspended just inches above Trent's neck. While I was inside a high-rise skyscraper orchestrating his absolute ruin, Trent was busy living in a complete delusion. He believed the upcoming Saturday gala at the St. Regis Hotel was going to be his ultimate salvation. He had invited all of his remaining wealthy clients, local politicians, and prominent community leaders. His plan was incredibly desperate but entirely predictable. He intended to publicly parade his new relationship with Vanguard Holdings, using our fake endorsement to lure in fresh investors. He genuinely thought he could secure enough new capital at the gala to unfreeze his operational accounts, pay off the internal auditors, and keep his Ponzi scheme alive for another year. He needed the event to look perfectly lavish to maintain the illusion of wealth. But because his credit cards were completely locked and his accounts were frozen, he had absolutely no way to pay for the massive ballroom, the expensive decorations, or the food. That is exactly where my sister Vanessa came in. My phone rang later that afternoon while I was standing in my commercial kitchen. It was Vanessa. I let it ring 3 times before answering, forcing my posture to slouch. Even though she could not see me injecting pure defeat into my voice, Vanessa did not even bother to say hello. Her tone was dripping with smug, vindictive satisfaction. "I assume you heard about Malik losing his little internship today," she sneered. "Let that be a lesson to both of you. When you disrespect my husband in public, there are severe consequences." I gripped the edge of my stainless steel prep counter, my knuckles turning white, but I kept my voice completely flat. "What do you want, Vanessa?" "Trent is hosting his most important corporate gala this Saturday at the St. Regis," she commanded, her voice echoing with unearned authority. "Since his accounts are dealing with that annoying temporary bank hold, we need you to provide the catering. And you are going to do it for free. Consider it your apology for the embarrassing stunt you and Malik pulled at the church. If the food is perfect, And if you stay hidden in the kitchen like a good little worker, I might consider putting in a good word with the university board to get Malik his internship back. It was a blatant, malicious lie. She had absolutely no intention of helping Malik. She just wanted to exploit my desperation to get free labor for her husband's fraudulent party. She wanted to parade around a luxury hotel ballroom in a designer gown, while her sister slaved away over a hot stove in the back room to feed her wealthy friends. "I will do it," I said softly, injecting just the right amount of pathetic surrender into my delivery. "I will bring my entire crew. I will make sure the food is absolutely flawless. Just please do not do anything else to ruin Malik." "Good girl," Vanessa said, a cruel, sharp laugh escaping her lips. "Wear your cleanest chef coat, Chloe. We have very important investors coming, and I do not want you looking like a grease stain if someone accidentally opens the kitchen doors." She hung up the phone without waiting for a reply. I lowered the phone from my ear and smiled. It was a terrifying, hollow smile that did not reach my eyes. She wanted me hidden in the kitchen. She wanted me to be the invisible servant catering to their fake royalty. They were walking blindly into a slaughterhouse, completely unaware that the very woman they were ordering around was the one holding the blade. I spent the next 2 days preparing for the gala with absolute precision. I ordered the finest ingredients. I prepped the most exquisite menu my small catering company had ever produced. I wanted the night to be absolutely perfect. I wanted Trent to stand on that brightly lit stage looking out at his wealthy guests, tasting the fine food and feeling like he had finally won. I wanted him to reach the absolute highest peak of his arrogance and breathe a sigh of relief. Because the higher he climbed, the more devastating the impact of the fall was going to be. Saturday night was rapidly approaching. Trent thought he was throwing the party of the decade to save his business. He had no idea that the St. Regis Hotel was about to become the graveyard of the Lawson family legacy. The loading dock of the St. Regis Hotel was freezing when my crew and I arrived early Saturday morning. We spent 2 hours unloading crate after crate of premium ingredients from the back of my catering van. Trent had demanded a 5-course plated dinner for 200 of the most affluent investors and politicians in Atlanta. He wanted Wagyu beef butter poached lobster and imported black truffles. He wanted a menu that screamed endless wealth and elite status. Because his accounts were completely frozen, he had not given me a single dime for the food budget. I had paid for every single ounce of it out of my own pocket, quietly funneling the money through my business accounts. Trent fully believed I had taken on crippling high-interest debt just to appease him and protect the family name. The hotel provided us with their massive secondary industrial kitchen. It was an intimidating expanse of gleaming stainless steel, massive convection ovens, and glaring fluorescent lights. I tied my apron, organized my staff of 10, and immediately got to work. We had to prep 200 intricate plates, and I demanded absolute perfection from my team. I wanted the food to be the most spectacular meal those wealthy guests had ever consumed. About an hour into our prep work, the heavy swinging doors of the kitchen pushed open. Trent walked in. He was wearing a custom-tailored black tuxedo that probably cost more than the van parked out back. He tried to project his usual arrogant swagger, but I could see the fine tremor in his hands and the dark circles under his eyes. The pressure of the Vanguard Holdings trap was physically eating him alive. He needed this gala to be a massive success, so he could secure enough new capital from the attendees to unfreeze his accounts and hide his fraud. He walked directly over to my prep station, looking down his nose at the raw ingredients. "Look at you, Chloe," Trent said, his voice echoing over the clatter of pots and pans. "Right where you belong. Hidden in the back, sweating over a hot stove, serving the people who actually run this city. Make sure those lobster tails are not rubbery. These people eat at Michelin-star restaurants. They will know if you try to serve them cheap garbage." I did not look up from my cutting board. My knife moved with rhythmic, practiced precision through a bundle of fresh herbs. "I am only here because Vanessa asked me to help," I replied quietly, keeping my voice intentionally submissive to feed his massive ego. "I am doing my best." Trent let out a harsh, grating laugh. He stepped closer, invading my personal space. The smell of his expensive Tom Ford cologne mixed sickeningly with the scent of the raw seafood. "Vanessa does not run my business, Chloe," he said, his tone dropping into a cold, menacing whisper. "I do. And let us be perfectly clear about why you are actually here sweating for free." He leaned in so close I could hear his shallow breathing. "You are here because I own your mother," he hissed. "You know she took out a massive second mortgage to help fund my commercial ventures, right? Well, things are incredibly tight right now with this annoying bank audit. My cash is tied up. If this food is not absolutely flawless, if you embarrass me tonight, and I fail to secure the new investors I need to satisfy the bank, I will let that mortgage default. The bank will seize your mother's house by the end of the month, and she will be out on the street. And I will personally make sure she knows it is your fault for ruining my gala." I stopped chopping. I slowly set my heavy chef knife down on the stainless steel counter and finally looked up at him. He was actively threatening to render my mother homeless. He was using the very debt he had fraudulently forced upon her as a weapon to guarantee I worked the kitchen for free. He thought he was playing a master stroke of psychological manipulation. He thought he had me completely backed into a corner, terrified for my mother's future. He had absolutely no idea that Vanguard Holdings had already purchased that exact loan. He did not own my mother's house. I did. I held the deed to the property in a secure vault downtown. The sheer audacity of his threat was almost amusing. He was trying to blackmail me with a gun that I had already emptied. By the end of this night, he was going to be the one begging for a roof over his head. "I understand, Trent," I said softly, lowering my eyes to give him the victory he so desperately needed to feel in that moment. "The food will be flawless. You have my absolute word. No one will go hungry tonight." Trent smirked, clearly satisfied with my apparent surrender. He patted my shoulder condescendingly, a heavy, degrading slap against my chef coat. "Good girl," he said smoothly. "Keep your head down, keep the plates moving, and whatever you do, do not come out into the main ballroom." I told my guests the catering was being handled by a boutique French agency. I do not need them seeing my bankrupt sister-in-law wandering around in a dirty apron. He turned around and pushed through the double doors, heading back out to the opulent ballroom to greet his imaginary saviors. I picked my knife back up and resumed chopping. My hands were perfectly steady. My heart was beating at a calm, even pace. A few minutes later, Vanessa strutted into the kitchen. She was wearing a stunning floor-length emerald green gown and dripping in diamonds that were probably purchased with stolen money. She did not even look at my crew. She walked straight up to me, holding her nose slightly, as if the smell of the cooking food offended her. "Make sure the servers use the back hallways," Vanessa commanded, checking her reflection in the polished steel of the refrigerator door. "The guests are starting to arrive. The mayor is here, Chloe. Do not mess this up. And like Trent said, stay out of sight. You are just the help tonight." "I will stay exactly where I need to be," I replied evenly, not missing a single beat of my prep work. "Enjoy your party, Vanessa." She rolled her eyes and marched back out to join her husband. I turned around to face my kitchen staff. They were all looking at me, having heard the horrific way my family had just spoken to me. Some of them looked angry, others looked deeply sympathetic. They knew how hard I worked. They knew I did not deserve to be treated like dirt. "Listen to me, everyone," I said, my voice clear and commanding. "We have 2 hours until the first course goes out. I want you to execute this menu with absolute perfection. I want every single plate to look like $1,000,000. I want the investors in that ballroom to be completely dazzled by the presentation." I looked at the heavy doors leading out to the gala. I wanted Trent to feel on top of the world. I wanted him to taste the luxury and believe he had survived his financial crisis. I wanted his ego to inflate until it took up the entire St. Regis ballroom. Because the trap was fully set, the legal documents were signed, and Julian Sterling was already on his way. I just needed to keep Trent completely distracted until the executioner arrived. The first two courses of the evening went out with absolute military precision. My kitchen staff operated like a well-oiled machine under the harsh fluorescent lights. We sent out 200 plates of perfectly seared diver scallops with a citrus beurre blanc, followed by a delicate roasted butternut squash bisque, adorned with shaved black truffles. Through the small circular windows of the swinging kitchen doors, I could see the opulent ballroom. The crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over the wealthy attendees. I watched Trent working the room, shaking hands, flashing his perfectly bleached smile, and desperately trying to project the image of a billionaire real estate titan. Everything was running flawlessly until the main course prep began. We were in the middle of plating the Wagyu beef when the kitchen doors violently pushed open. Vanessa marched in moving with a frantic, aggressive energy. The delicate illusion of her high society grace instantly vanished the second she crossed the threshold into the service area. She was sweating slightly, her diamond necklace glittering under the harsh lights, and she held an empty champagne flute in her hand. She did not come into the kitchen to check on the food. She came into the kitchen because the intense pressure of the evening was getting to her, and she needed a punching bag to make herself feel powerful. Vanessa walked directly past the busy prep stations, completely ignoring the frantic pace of the staff, and stopped right in front of my cutting board. She looked me up and down, her lip curling into a sneer of pure disgust. "Look at you," Vanessa said loudly, her voice cutting through the clatter of pans and the sizzle of the grills. "You look absolutely atrocious, Chloe. Your face is shining with grease, and that oversized chef coat makes you look like a mechanic. I specifically told you to look presentable tonight in case someone accidentally saw you. You are an embarrassment." I kept my eyes focused on the perfectly cooked piece of Wagyu resting on my board. "I am in the middle of plating a 200-person service, Vanessa," I said calmly. "Working in a commercial kitchen involves heat and physical labor. I am not here to model clothes. I am here to make sure your husband's guests actually get fed." Vanessa scoffed, waving her empty champagne glass in the air. "Oh, please do not try to make your little cooking hobby sound noble. You are flipping meat for free because you have no other choice. You are here because we allow you to be here. Do not ever forget that. You and that pathetic little cousin of ours are exactly the same. You both think you are so smart, but you are nothing but bottom feeders relying on the charity of people like Trent and me." She took a step closer, purposely invading my workspace to assert her dominance. But as she stepped forward, the sharp heel of her emerald green designer shoe clipped the edge of a rubber floor mat. She stumbled slightly, her foot dragging across a small, barely visible drop of olive oil that had splashed near the edge of the prep station. Vanessa gasped loudly, steadying herself against the stainless steel counter. She looked down at her shoe and let out a dramatic, piercing shriek. "My shoe!" she yelled, her voice echoing off the tiled walls. "Look what you did to my shoe! This is custom Italian leather, Chloe. These heels cost more than your entire rusty van." I looked down. There was a microscopic smudge on the very edge of the sole. It was absolutely nothing, a tiny mark that would wipe off with a dry napkin. But Vanessa was not actually angry about the shoe. She was angry that she was living a lie and she needed to inflict pain on someone to regain her sense of superiority. "Clean it up," Vanessa commanded, pointing her manicured finger directly at the floor. I slowly looked up at her, my face completely blank. "Excuse me." "You heard me." Vanessa snapped, her voice growing louder and more hysterical. "You run a filthy, disgusting kitchen. You ruined my shoe. Get on your knees right now and wipe it off." The entire kitchen went dead silent. The sizzling of the meat and the clattering of the plates completely stopped. 10 of my employees stood frozen at their stations, staring at my sister in absolute horror. They were working-class people, professionals who busted their backs every single day to make an honest living, and they were watching a woman dripping in stolen diamonds demand that their boss kneel on the floor like a slave. One of my sous chefs, a young woman named Sarah, could not hold her tongue. "Ma'am, you cannot speak to Chef Chloe like that," Sarah said, taking a step forward, her face flushed with anger. This is a professional kitchen. She is working hard for you. Vanessa snapped her head toward Sarah, her eyes wide with unhinged fury. Shut your mouth, you minimum wage! Nobody, Vanessa shrieked. Who do you think you are talking to? I will have you fired. I will have you blacklisted from every restaurant in Atlanta. Do not ever speak to me again. I raised my hand, instantly silencing Sarah before she could risk her own livelihood. It is fine, Sarah, I said quietly, keeping my voice perfectly steady. Go back to your station. Make sure the beef does not overcook. I turned my attention back to my sister. She was breathing heavily, a triumphant, wicked smirk spreading across her face. She truly believed she had won. She believed she had successfully broken my spirit in front of my own staff. She wanted to see me humiliated, reduced to nothing, kneeling at her feet, in the very place where I commanded respect. I reached over to the counter and picked up a clean, dry microfiber towel. I did not argue. I did not yell. I did not throw the pan of searing hot oil in her face, even though every single instinct in my body was screaming at me to do exactly that. I thought about Malik crying in his dorm room because this woman had stolen his future. I thought about my mother willing to throw me to the wolves to protect this fake empire. I slowly stepped out from behind the prep counter. I lowered myself down onto the hard tiled floor of the kitchen. I knelt right in front of Vanessa. A collective quiet gasp went through my kitchen staff. I could feel their anger and their profound pity radiating toward me. But I did not feel humiliated. I felt an overwhelming sense of cold, terrifying clarity. I took the microfiber towel and gently wiped the microscopic smudge off the edge of Vanessa's designer shoe. I stared at the green leather, knowing with absolute certainty that the credit card she used to buy these shoes was currently frozen. I knew that the house she lived in was actively being foreclosed on by my lawyer. I knew that the massive ballroom she was about to walk back into was nothing but a beautiful, expensive tomb. She was forcing a multimillionaire to wipe her shoe, completely oblivious to the fact that I legally owned the ground she was standing on. There, I said softly, my voice devoid of any emotion. It is clean. Vanessa looked down at me, her smile radiant with toxic satisfaction. Next time, try to keep your workspace as clean as your apologies, she sneered. Now hurry up with the main course. Trent has investors waiting and we do not have all night. She turned on her heel and strutted back out of the double doors, the heavy wood swinging shut behind her, cutting off the sound of the classical music playing in the ballroom. I stayed on the floor for just a second longer. I took a deep breath, absorbing the absolute peak of their cruelty. This was the ceiling. This was the worst they could possibly do to me. I stood up slowly and tossed the towel directly into the trash can. I turned back to my staff. They were all staring at me, waiting for me to break down or explode. I did neither. I walked back to my cutting board, picked up my knife, and looked at my team. The Wagyu needs to be plated in exactly 3 minutes. I said, my voice ringing out with absolute undeniable authority. Let us move. Give them the best meal of their lives. The kitchen roared back to life, louder and more determined than before. I began slicing the beef with surgical precision. Vanessa had gotten her moment of absolute power. She had extracted her pound of flesh. But her time was officially up. The clock had run out. I glanced up at the large digital clock on the kitchen wall. It was 8:30 in the evening. Julian Sterling was scheduled to walk through the front doors of the St. Regis Hotel at exactly 9 o'clock. And he was not coming alone. The last plate of Wagyu beef left the kitchen exactly on schedule. I wiped down my stainless steel prep station, untied my heavily stained apron, and walked quietly toward the swinging double doors. The heavy dinner rush was officially over, which meant my real work for the evening was just beginning. I pushed the right door open just a fraction of an inch, creating a perfect vantage point to look out into the extravagant St. Regis ballroom without being seen. Trent was standing at the front of the room, basking in the warm glow of the crystal chandeliers. He had a microphone in one hand and a glass of expensive champagne in the other. He was in his element, radiating the sickeningly confident energy of a man who firmly believed he was untouchable. My mother was sitting at the front table nodding along to his every word, with a look of absolute worship on her face. Vanessa was seated next to her, adjusting her stolen diamonds for the photographer circulating the room. Trent raised his glass, his voice booming through the sound system. He thanked the wealthy politicians and investors for attending his gala. And then he made the fatal mistake of bragging about his newest triumph. He loudly announced that his firm had just secured a massive exclusive partnership with Vanguard Holdings. He spun a ridiculous lie about how Vanguard had practically begged him to take their capital, praising his unique vision for commercial real estate in Atlanta. He promised the investors in the room that if they gave him their money tonight, they would be riding the Vanguard wave to unprecedented wealth. I stood in the shadows of the kitchen, watching him dig his own grave with absolute precision. The irony was so rich and intoxicating I could practically taste it. He was publicly staking his entire reputation on a company that I had created purely to destroy him. Right in the middle of his arrogant speech, Trent's phone buzzed aggressively in the breast pocket of his tuxedo. He ignored it with a smooth smile, making a terrible joke about how millions of dollars never sleep. The crowd offered a polite, wealthy chuckle, but 5 seconds later, the phone buzzed again. And again. Then his smartwatch lit up, vibrating violently against his wrist. Trent glanced down at the watch face. I watched through the narrow gap in the doors as the arrogant smile completely froze on his face. The blood instantly drained from his cheeks, leaving him looking like a pale, terrified ghost in a custom-tailored suit. He lowered the microphone, his hand suddenly shaking so violently that a few drops of champagne spilled over the rim of his glass and stained his crisp white shirt. "Excuse me for just one moment, ladies and gentlemen," Trent stammered into the microphone, his voice cracking noticeably. "A minor business emergency requires my immediate attention. Please enjoy the main course." He stepped off the stage and practically sprinted toward the service hallway located just to the right of the kitchen doors. I quickly moved away from the window, slipping into the dark, quiet pantry corridor that ran parallel to the service hallway. The walls were thin enough that I could hear every single word. Trent burst through the hallway doors, breathing heavily. He frantically pulled his phone out of his pocket and answered the call. "What is going on?" Trent hissed into the phone, his voice laced with pure panic. "Why are you calling me dozens of times in the middle of my gala? I told you I am securing the new investors right now." I could not hear the voice on the other end of the line, but I did not need to. I already knew exactly who was calling him. It was his panicked legal counsel, or whoever was left of his accounting department. "What do you mean the accounts are locked?" Trent yelled, slamming his fist against the hallway wall. "They were just on a temporary internal audit hold. Tell the bank to lift it. We have the Vanguard capital." A few seconds of silence passed as the person on the phone delivered the fatal blow. "No." Trent gasped, his voice suddenly dropping to a terrified, breathless whisper. "No, that is impossible. You are reading it wrong. Vanguard gave me a bridge loan. They cannot just trigger a default clause in 3 days. What fraud misrepresentations. I did not lie on the application. They cannot seize the business accounts. They cannot do that." Trent began pacing the hallway like a trapped animal. He was hyperventilating, pulling desperately at his expensive silk tie as if it were suddenly choking him. The reality of his situation was crashing down on him with the force of a freight train. He pulled the phone away from his ear and wildly tapped on the screen, frantically opening his mobile banking applications. I stood quietly in the dark pantry, listening to his rapid, terrified breathing. "Zero," Trent whimpered, staring at his phone screen. "Everything is zero. They took the escrow. They took the operational funds. They took my personal savings." He was completely ruined. In a matter of seconds, Vanguard Holdings had executed the absolute seizure of his entire financial existence. He had no money to pay the private lenders who were threatening his life. He had no money to pay the St. Regis Hotel for the massive ballroom he was currently standing outside of. The millions of dollars he thought he had secured were gone, instantly reclaimed by my lawyers to satisfy the breach of contract. He was a fake billionaire standing in a rented tuxedo with absolutely nothing to his name. "Trent, what are you doing out here?" The sharp, annoyed voice of my sister Vanessa echoed down the hallway. She pushed through the doors, her emerald green gown rustling loudly. "You are embarrassing me in front of the mayor," she snapped, putting her hands on her hips. "You left the stage looking like you were about to be sick. Get off your phone and get back out there. We need these people to write checks tonight." Trent slowly turned to look at his wife. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, and filled with a manic, terrifying desperation. He looked at her diamond necklace. He looked at her designer dress. He realized in that exact moment that everything she was wearing was collateral. "Shut up, Vanessa." Trent snarled, his voice venomous and unstable. "Just shut your mouth for 1 second. It is gone." "What is gone?" she asked, her annoyed expression faltering slightly as she noticed the sheer terror on his face. "Trent, you are sweating. You are ruining your suit. What is going on? Everything is gone," he yelled, grabbing her by the shoulders and shaking her slightly. Vanguard pulled the funding. They triggered a fraud clause. They seized the corporate accounts, the personal accounts, the cars, everything. "I have $0 to my name, Vanessa. Do you understand me? The bank is going to call the police. We are completely bankrupt." Vanessa stood frozen in the hallway, her mouth falling open in silent shock. The color drained from her perfectly made-up face. She looked down at her diamond rings, then back up at her husband, unable to comprehend the words he was saying. But the gala Vanessa whispered, her voice trembling. "The hotel bill. The investors." "There are no investors!" Trent shouted, dragging his hands roughly down his face. "They are not going to give me a dime if they find out I am under federal investigation for fraud. I am going to prison, Vanessa. I am going to federal prison." I stepped quietly out of the dark pantry and walked toward the swinging doors that led back into the bright, busy kitchen. I had heard enough. The panic was beautiful. The destruction was absolute. Trent and Vanessa were currently standing in the service hallway, realizing their entire fraudulent empire had burned to the ground. But they still had one major problem left to face. They needed a scapegoat. They needed someone to blame for the missing money, the ruined gala, and the sudden police investigation. And I knew exactly what Trent was going to do next. He was going to do what he always did. He was going to try and throw me directly into the line of fire to save his own skin. I walked over to the prep counter and calmly waited for the final act of the night to begin. 10 minutes after Trent and Vanessa had their panicked breakdown in the service hallway, the heavy swinging doors of the kitchen pushed open once again. Trent walked back into my workspace, but his entire demeanor had shifted. The arrogant swagger was completely gone, replaced by the erratic, jerky movements of a desperate animal backed into a corner. He was sweating profusely, his breathing was shallow, and his eyes darted around the room like he was looking for an escape route. He had realized that he could not hide his financial collapse from the wealthy investors sitting in the ballroom. He needed a spectacular distraction. He needed a scapegoat to blame for his frozen accounts, and he needed the lie to be so massive and public that it would buy him sympathy instead of prison time. He walked directly up to my prep station. He did not say a word about the food. Instead, he aggressively bumped his shoulder against mine, pretending to lose his balance on the slick-tiled floor. As he collided with me, I felt his hand brush against the deep side pocket of my baggy chef coat. It was a clumsy, frantic movement. He quickly stepped back, muttered a breathless apology about the floor being slippery, and practically ran back out of the kitchen. I did not have to reach into my pocket to know what he had just done. I could feel the heavy, cold weight of a solid gold Rolex watch resting against my hip. It was his prized possession, the $40,000 timepiece he wore every single day to project his fake wealth. In his twisted, panicked mind, he had just formulated the perfect exit strategy. If he could convince the police and his investors that I had stolen corporate assets and compromised his security credentials, he could claim the Vanguard Holdings account freeze was simply a protective measure against a criminal investigation. He was trying to sacrifice my freedom to buy himself 24 hours of borrowed time. I left the heavy watch exactly where he put it. I did not pull it out. I did not throw it away. I simply wiped down my cutting board and waited. Less than 15 minutes later, the soft classical music playing in the main ballroom abruptly stopped. The low murmur of wealthy conversation was instantly replaced by the sharp, authoritative sound of heavy boots marching across the hardwood floor. Through the small, circular windows of the kitchen doors, I saw the flashing red and blue lights of patrol cars reflecting off the massive glass windows of the St. Regis Hotel. The kitchen doors violently burst open. Two uniformed Atlanta police officers walked in, their hands resting cautiously on their duty belts. Right behind them was Trent, acting completely hysterical, with Vanessa clinging to his arm and sobbing theatrically. "There she is," Trent shouted, pointing his trembling finger directly at my face. "That is the woman. She is the one who has been stealing from my firm." The sheer volume of his accusation drew the attention of the entire gala. The heavy doors were propped open, and the wealthy investors, the local politicians, and the church elders all crowded near the entrance of the kitchen, their eyes wide with shock. My mother pushed her way to the front of the crowd, her face a mask of absolute horror as she saw the police walking toward her daughter. Trent stepped into the center of the kitchen, making sure his voice carried out to his affluent audience. "Officers, I have been dealing with a massive security breach all week." He lied effortlessly, his voice dripping with manufactured betrayal. "Millions of dollars in corporate assets have been compromised. My bank had to freeze my entire operational portfolio this afternoon because someone was stealing high-value collateral from my private safe. I thought it was an outside hacker, but I just checked my jacket pocket and my corporate Rolex is missing. She is my sister-in-law. I hired her to cater this event out of pity because she is bankrupt, and she used her access to rob me blind." The entire kitchen was dead silent. My staff stood frozen in place, staring at the police officers. The crowd of VIP guests began to whisper furiously. I looked at Trent. His eyes were wide and pleading silently, daring me to fight back, knowing that if I panicked, I would look incredibly guilty. "Ma'am," one of the police officers said, stepping directly in front of me with a stern expression. "Step away from the counter and keep your hands where I can see them. Do you have anything in your pockets that belongs to this man?" I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. I looked the officer dead in the eye, raised my hands slowly, and nodded toward my right side. "Check my pocket," I said quietly. The officer reached into the deep pocket of my chef coat. He pulled his hand out, holding the heavy, diamond-encrusted gold Rolex under the harsh fluorescent lights. A loud collective gasp echoed from the crowd of investors gathered at the door. Trent let out a loud, theatrical sigh of relief, running his hands through his hair. "I knew it," he yelled, turning to the crowd to make sure they were all watching his performance. "I caught the thief. This is why my accounts are locked, everyone. This criminal jeopardized my entire firm. Arrest her right now." Vanessa buried her face in her hands, pretending to be overcome with grief. "I cannot believe my own sister would try to destroy my husband's empire," she wailed loudly. Before the police officer could even ask me a single question, the crowd parted violently. My mother Brenda marched into the kitchen. Her face was contorted with a rage so profound and toxic, it made her look like a complete stranger. She did not ask me for an explanation. She did not wonder why a supposedly brilliant financial mogul would leave a $40,000 watch lying around a greasy kitchen. She only saw that her pristine social standing was being threatened, and she chose her side instantly. She walked right up to me, raised her hand, and slapped me across the face with every single ounce of strength she had. The sharp cracking sound of her palm hitting my cheek echoed like a gunshot in the silent kitchen. My head snapped to the side. The metallic taste of blood instantly pooled in the corner of my mouth, where my teeth had cut into the inside of my cheek. "You disgusting, jealous failure!" my mother screamed, her voice breaking with absolute fury. "You could not stand seeing Trent succeed, could you? You could not stand that your sister has a beautiful life, while you fry chicken in a rusty van. You deliberately tried to ruin this family. You are dead to me, Chloe. You are absolutely dead to me. Take her away, officers." I do not ever want to see her face again. I slowly turned my head back to look at her. My cheek was burning, throbbing with a hot, intense pain. But the physical sting was nothing compared to the absolute death of my love for her. The last remaining thread of my childhood attachment snapped right there in the middle of that commercial kitchen. She had just struck her own daughter in front of 200 strangers to protect a white man who had secretly stolen her home. The police officer grabbed my right arm, pulling it gently but firmly behind my back. "You have the right to remain silent," he recited smoothly, reaching onto his duty belt. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." I heard the distinct, terrifying, metallic click of handcuffs being unpouched. Trent was smiling. It was a small, wicked smirk of absolute victory. He truly believed he had won. He believed he had successfully framed me, secured his alibi, and survived the night. The officer pressed the cold steel of the first cuff against my wrist. But right before the metal could snap shut, a voice boomed from the back of the crowded ballroom. It was a voice so deep, authoritative, and impossibly loud that it completely paralyzed the entire room. "I highly suggest you put those handcuffs away, officer, unless you plan on using them on the man in the tuxedo." The crowd of wealthy investors parted like the Red Sea. Trent's smug smile vanished instantly. My mother froze. The police officer paused, holding the open handcuff in the air. Walking through the center of the ballroom, illuminated by the crystal chandeliers, was Julian Sterling. He was flanked by 4 massive, unsmiling private security guards and 2 federal agents wearing dark windbreakers. He held a thick leather briefcase in his right hand. The digital clock on the kitchen wall silently rolled over to exactly 9 o'clock. The executioner had arrived. Julian stepped into the harsh fluorescent lighting of the St. Regis kitchen. The 2 federal agents flanked him, their presence completely dwarfing the local Atlanta police officers. "What is the meaning of this?" Trent demanded, trying to puff up his chest and regain his false authority. "You cannot just barge into a private catering area." Julian ignored him completely. He opened his thick leather briefcase and pulled out a stack of legally binding documents bearing the heavy seal of a federal judge. He handed the top page directly to the arresting officer. "That is an emergency federal injunction," Julian said smoothly, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "My client is currently the subject of a highly classified financial operation, and you are unlawfully detaining her based on the fabricated testimony of a man currently under federal investigation for felony wire fraud." The local police officer read the document, his eyes widening as he scanned the signatures. He immediately unlocked the cold steel handcuff from my wrist and took a large step back, nodding respectfully. Julian turned to me, offering a deep, formal bow. "I apologize for the delay, Madam President," he said loudly enough for the entire crowd of wealthy investors gathered at the doorway to hear. "The final asset seizure documents are ready for your execution." The entire kitchen descended into a state of absolute paralyzed shock. "Madam President," the words echoed in the tense silence. I slowly rubbed my freed wrist, feeling the blood rush back into my hand. I reached up and unbuttoned my stained, baggy chef coat. I let it drop to the greasy, tiled floor, revealing the sharp-tailored black silk blouse and designer trousers I had worn underneath. I did not look at my mother or my sister. I walked straight past Trent, who was staring at Julian with his jaw completely unhinged, looking like he had just seen a ghost. I walked out of the kitchen and directly into the opulent ballroom. The crowd of elite guests parted for me instinctively, sensing the massive shift in power. I walked up the carpeted steps onto the main stage where Trent had stood just minutes before. Julian followed right behind me, handing a small silver USB drive to the hotel's audiovisual technician. "Put it on the main screen," I commanded. The massive projector hummed to life. The beautifully animated Vanguard Holdings logo disappeared, replaced by the stark, undeniable reality of Trent's financial crimes. Massive spreadsheets highlighted bank transfers, forged tax returns, and offshore account numbers flashed across the giant screen for everyone to see. Ladies and gentlemen, I said into the microphone, my voice perfectly steady and echoing across the silent ballroom. My brother-in-law invited you here tonight to celebrate his partnership with Vanguard Holdings. He wanted you to invest your hard-earned money into his commercial real estate fund. But as you can clearly see on the screen behind me, Trent has not purchased a single piece of real estate in 3 years. He is running a massive Ponzi scheme, and as of 3 hours ago, his entire operational portfolio is worth exactly $0. The ballroom erupted into chaos. Wealthy investors began shouting in outrage. Local politicians whispered furiously to their aides, already calculating how to distance themselves from the scandal. Trent sprinted out of the kitchen and stumbled into the ballroom, his face pale and glistening with sweat. "Turn that off!" Trent screamed, lunging toward the audiovisual table. "It is a lie. She is a bankrupt caterer. She forged those documents. Do not listen to her." I held up my hand, and the two federal agents stepped forward, easily blocking Trent's path and forcing him back. "I did not forge anything, Trent," I said, looking down at him from the stage with absolute disdain. "Because Vanguard Holdings did not randomly select you for a $10 million bridge loan. I selected you. I am the sole owner and chief executive officer of Vanguard Holdings." The silence that hit the room was deafening. Trent stopped struggling against the federal agents. His bloodshot eyes darted from me to Julian and finally to the massive screen displaying his forged signatures. He realized in that exact second that he had not scammed a faceless corporate giant. He had walked blindly into a trap set by the very woman he had treated like garbage. "You signed a contract with a strict death clause, Trent." I continued, my voice cold and merciless. "You committed material fraud on your application. By the power vested in my firm, I have officially triggered the default. I own your brokerage. I own your bank accounts. I own the imported car you drove here in. I even own the commercial building you currently lease for your office. You are completely liquidated." Trent's knees gave out. The arrogant, wealthy white savior of our family collapsed onto the floor of the St. Regis ballroom, sobbing hysterically and begging for mercy in front of the entire city's elite. Vanessa pushed through the crowd looking like a manic ghost. She stared at Trent crying on the floor, and then she looked up at me standing on the stage. "My diamonds," Vanessa choked out, gripping her heavy necklace. "My house. You cannot do this, Chloe. We are family. You cannot take my life away." I looked at her with absolute disgust. "You made me scrub your shoe on my hands and knees 30 minutes ago," I reminded her, my voice echoing through the speakers. "You tried to destroy Malik's college career yesterday just to make yourself feel powerful. You do not have a house anymore, Vanessa. Every single thing you own belongs to me now. You are going to have to get a job. Maybe I can write you a glowing recommendation to scrub toilets for minimum wage." As Vanessa collapsed next to her husband, crying uncontrollably and ruining her expensive makeup, my mother slowly walked up to the edge of the stage. Her face was a masterclass in rapid, desperate calculation. She had just watched her golden child lose everything, but she had also just realized that the daughter she had physically abused and alienated was actually a multimillionaire holding all the cards. "Chloe?" My mother whispered, fake tears streaming down her face. "Oh my God, Chloe, I had no idea. I am so sorry. You have to understand, I was just trying to protect the family. Trent manipulated me. He lied to me. I always knew you were destined for greatness, baby. You are my daughter. We can fix this." I stared down at the woman who had slapped me across the face just moments ago. She was not crying because she regretted hitting me. She was crying because she wanted access to my bank account. I reached into Julian's leather portfolio and pulled out a single heavily stamped legal document. "I did not lie to you, Chloe," my mother cried, reaching her trembling hands up toward the stage. "I am your mother. We share the same blood." I held the document out where the entire room could see it. "Do you know what this is, Brenda?" I asked, refusing to call her mom. She shook her head, looking up at me with desperate, pleading eyes. "2 months ago, your perfect son-in-law convinced you to take out a massive second mortgage on your fully paid-off house to fund his Ponzi scheme," I explained calmly. He defaulted on that loan the second his accounts froze today. The bank was going to foreclose on you next week. But Vanguard Holdings bought the debt. I bought the debt. My mother gasped, a look of profound relief washing over her face. She smiled through her tears, genuinely believing she had just been rescued. "You saved my house," she sobbed, pressing her hands to her chest. "Oh, Chloe, thank you. Thank you for saving my home. I knew you loved me." I looked at her with dead, empty eyes. "I did not save your home, Brenda," I said softly, making sure the microphone picked up every single syllable. "I bought my home. You used your house as collateral for a fraudulent loan, and I am collecting the debt. You slapped me in the face and told me I was dead to you. So consider this my final act as your daughter." I dropped the legal document. It fluttered down through the air and landed right at her feet. "That is your official 30-day eviction notice," I said, my voice ringing out with absolute finality. "You have exactly 1 month to pack your designer clothes and get out of my property." I stepped away from the podium. I did not look back at Trent crying on the floor. I did not look at Vanessa screaming in panic. And I did not look at my mother, who had dropped to her knees clutching the eviction notice and wailing in absolute agony as the reality of her homelessness set in. I walked down the back stairs of the stage, flanked by Julian and my security team, leaving the ruins of my toxic family behind me forever. The cool night air hit my face the moment I stepped out of the St. Regis Hotel, and for the first time in 35 years, I took a breath that felt completely my own. I did not look back at the grand ballroom. I did not need to. The dominoes I had carefully lined up had all fallen perfectly into place, and the destruction I left behind was absolute, permanent, and entirely justified. The legal and financial fallout over the next few months was nothing short of spectacular. Trent's catastrophic collapse became the leading story on every local news network in Atlanta. Because my lawyers at Vanguard Holdings had handed the Federal Bureau of Investigation a perfectly documented, irrefutable paper trail of his financial crimes, the federal prosecutors did not even have to work hard to build their case. The Monday after the gala, federal agents raided his leased commercial office, seizing every computer, every file, and every single asset he had falsely claimed as his own. Trent was arrested and held without bail. His high-priced defense attorneys abandoned him the second they realized his accounts were completely frozen and he could not pay their retainers. He was forced to use a public defender, a humiliating reality for a man who used to brag about his limitless wealth. The trial was incredibly brief. Faced with hundreds of counts of wire fraud, money laundering, and grand larceny, his arrogant facade completely shattered. He took a plea deal to avoid spending the rest of his natural life behind bars. The judge, an incredibly stern woman who had zero sympathy for white-collar criminals who preyed on their own families, sentenced Trent to 15 years in a federal penitentiary. The last time I saw him was on a television screen wearing a standard-issue orange jumpsuit, sobbing uncontrollably as the bailiffs led him away in handcuffs. He was no longer the brilliant, untouchable real estate mogul. He was just a federal inmate with a massive restitution debt he would never be able to repay. Vanessa's reality check was equally brutal. When the federal government and Vanguard Holdings finished liquidating Trent's estate, she was left with absolutely nothing. The bankruptcy court aggressively seized her designer wardrobe, her custom Italian shoes, her diamond jewelry, and the luxury vehicles she loved to parade around the city. Because she had spent her entire adult life relying on Trent's fraudulent money and acting superior to everyone else, she had never developed any actual marketable skills. Her business degree was completely useless because no reputable firm in the state of Georgia would hire the wife of a convicted Ponzi scheme mastermind. Faced with the terrifying reality of paying her own rent, Vanessa was forced to accept the only job she could find. She was hired as a daytime server and busboy at a busy, incredibly demanding chain restaurant downtown. The poetic justice of the universe is a beautiful thing. The woman who had marched into my commercial kitchen, mocked my chef coat, and demanded I scrub the bottom of her shoe was now wearing a cheap synthetic polyester uniform and a mandatory hairnet. She spends her days on her feet carrying heavy trays of greasy food, wiping down sticky tables, and enduring the rude demands of impatient customers. She is now experiencing the exact same exhausting invisible labor she once told me was only meant for bottom feeders. Every time someone snaps their fingers at her to refill their water glass, she is violently reminded of exactly who she used to be. But perhaps the most profound downfall belonged to my mother, Brenda. She truly believed that because she had given birth to me, I would eventually cave to her emotional manipulation and let her keep the house. She was completely wrong. Exactly 30 days after the gala, when she refused to pack her belongings, I sent the county sheriff to enforce the legal eviction. She was forced to carry her belongings out to the curb in black plastic garbage bags, while her wealthy neighbors peeked through their curtains and watched her ultimate humiliation. With no money, no credit, and her golden child son-in-law sitting in a federal prison, my mother had to apply for government assistance. She now lives in a cramped one-bedroom Section 8 subsidized apartment on the outskirts of the city. But the loss of her luxurious house was not her greatest punishment. Her true punishment was the complete and total loss of her social status. The elite church friends and the wealthy country club women she had spent decades trying to impress completely abandoned her. In the circles she used to run in poverty and public scandal are contagious diseases. When she walks into the grocery store, the women she used to gossip with actively turn their shopping carts down different aisles to avoid making eye contact with her. She is entirely isolated. She calls my phone from different blocked numbers every single week, leaving tearful voicemails begging for forgiveness, begging for money, and begging for her daughter back. I delete every single message without listening to them. She made her choice when she stood in that kitchen and slapped me across the face to protect a criminal. While my toxic relatives were busy harvesting the bitter consequences of their own actions, I was focused on cultivating the future. A few weeks after the gala, the winter weather began to break, giving way to a bright, crisp spring morning. I drove my brand new sleek black SUV onto the campus of the State University. I parked near the library and walked toward the small courtyard where I knew Malik usually studied between his classes. I found him sitting on a concrete bench under a large oak tree. He looked incredibly exhausted. He was staring blankly at an open textbook, a half-eaten sandwich resting next to him. Since Vanessa had maliciously destroyed his accounting internship, he had been working 3 different minimum wage jobs just to keep his head above water and pay for his final semester. He had dark circles under his eyes, but he was still pushing forward, refusing to give up. I walked up and sat down next to him on the bench. He blinked in surprise, a bright, genuine smile breaking through his exhaustion when he saw me. "Chloe," he said, closing his textbook, "what are you doing here? I thought you were busy running a massive corporate empire now." I laughed softly, enjoying the warmth of his presence. "I am always going to make time for the only real family I have," I said. "I brought you something." I reached into my designer tote bag and pulled out a thick, heavy manila envelope. I handed it to him. He looked at the envelope cautiously, wiping his hands on his jeans before taking it. "What is this?" he asked, weighing the heavy package in his hands. "Open it," I urged, gently, watching his face closely. Malik peeled back the metal clasp and reached inside. The first thing he pulled out was a set of heavy silver car keys attached to a leather fob. He stared at the keys, his brow furrowing in deep confusion. He looked from the keys to the brand-new black SUV parked just a few yards away at the curb. "Chloe," he stammered, his eyes widening. "You did not buy me a car. Tell me you did not buy me a car." "Keep looking in the envelope," I instructed, smiling warmly. His hands began to shake slightly as he reached back into the package. He pulled out a thick stack of official university documents. It was not paperwork for his current state college. It was an official acceptance and transfer letter to the Wharton School of Business at the University of Pennsylvania, one of the most prestigious and expensive financial programs in the entire world. Attached to the acceptance letter was a certified financial receipt from Vanguard Holdings. I read the words out loud as his eyes frantically scanned the page. "Your tuition, Your housing, your textbooks, and your meal plans are completely paid for in full through the completion of your master's degree, I said quietly. You do not have to work a single shift at that diner ever again, Malik. You are going to go to an Ivy League school, and you are going to become the greatest financial mind this family has ever seen. Tears immediately welled up in Malik's eyes. He gripped the university papers so tightly, his knuckles turned white. Chloe, I cannot accept this, he whispered, his voice cracking with intense emotion. This is hundreds of thousands of dollars. It is too much. It is too... I do not deserve this. There is one more piece of paper in the envelope, I told him, pointing to the manila folder resting on his lap. He took a shaky breath, reached inside one last time, and pulled out a single embossed legal certificate printed on heavy parchment paper. He read the bold letters at the top of the page. Irrevocable trust certificate. He scanned down to the account balance. $5 million. Malik stopped breathing. He stared at the number, his mouth slightly open, completely paralyzed by the magnitude of what he was holding. He looked at the $5 million trust fund, then at the Ivy League acceptance letter, and finally at the keys to a brand new car. He slowly turned his head to look at me, tears freely spilling over his eyelashes and streaming down his cheeks. Why, he choked out, completely overwhelmed. Why are you doing this for me? I reached out and placed my hand gently over his. Do you remember the night I was kicked out of my mother's house in the freezing rain? I asked softly. Do you remember running down that dark driveway to find me sitting in my rusty catering van? You were struggling to pay for your own textbooks. You were working double shifts just to survive. But you reached into your pocket and you gave me $150. You gave me every single cent you had to your name to make sure I did not go hungry. A quiet sob escaped Malik's chest as he remembered that night. You did not know I had $85 million in my bank account. I continued, my own vision blurring with tears. You thought I was completely bankrupt, broken, and humiliated. But you chose to protect me anyway. That $150 was the most valuable currency I have ever received in my entire life. It bought my absolute loyalty. You showed me what true unconditional love looks like. And now I am making sure that you never have to struggle, worry, or sacrifice your dreams ever again. You are a millionaire now, Malik. Go change the world. Malik leaned over and pulled me into a fierce, desperate hug. We sat on that concrete bench under the oak tree and cried together, not out of sadness, but out of absolute, overwhelming joy. The generational curse of toxic competition, jealousy, and betrayal in our bloodline ended right there on that college campus. For 35 years, I believed that family was defined solely by the people who shared your DNA. I believed that because my mother gave birth to me, I owed her my endless submission. I believed that because Vanessa was my sister, I had to tolerate her disrespect to keep the peace. But wealth, extreme wealth, is the ultimate magnifying glass. It strips away all the polite societal rules and reveals exactly who people truly are at their core. My biological family worshipped money over humanity, and it completely destroyed them. I learned the hard way that true family is not something you are born into. True family is an active daily choice. It is the people who stand in the pouring rain with you when you have absolutely nothing to offer them but your presence. It is the people who act as your shield when the rest of the world is throwing stones. You do not owe your peace, your success, or your sanity to people who only value you when you are convenient or profitable to them. If you are watching this right now and you are exhausted from shrinking yourself to fit into a family dynamic that constantly breaks your heart, I need you to hear me clearly. You are allowed to walk away. You are allowed to set ironclad boundaries. You are allowed to take all of that beautiful, resilient energy you have been wasting on toxic relatives and pour it entirely into yourself and the people who actually celebrate you. Your worth is not determined by the people who failed to love you correctly. Have you ever had to walk away from toxic family members to protect your own peace? Have you ever discovered that your chosen family was infinitely stronger than your biological one? I want to read your stories. Tell me about the moment you finally chose yourself in the comments below. If my journey resonated with you, if you believe that karma always collects its debts, and if you believe that good people deserve to win, in the end, please hit that like button. Share this video with anyone who might be struggling with family guilt right now. They need to know that they are not alone and that walking away is sometimes the bravest thing a person can do. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel so we can continue building a community of strength, boundaries, and absolute authenticity. Thank you for listening to my story. Keep your head high, protect your peace, and never let anyone tell you that you are just a servant in your own life. You are the architect of your own empire,